Our scripture today is found in the book of Luke. We are going to be covering Luke chapter 15. We're actually going to look at the whole thing. We're not going to read the whole thing. But all of Luke 15 really is Jesus dealing with parables of the lost. Okay? The parables of the lost. So the first section is Jesus telling the story of the lost sheep and the shepherd who leaves the 99 to go find the lost sheep. The second parable is the parable of a woman who loses one out of 100 coins and how she upturns the entire house looking for that coin. And then we have the parable of the prodigal son, and we are going to focus mostly on this last parable. But in all three parables, there is one thing that we find in common, is that when that which was lost is found, there is great rejoicing. And all of this is because Jesus is responding really to a comment by the Pharisees. And so let's look at that comment. In Luke 15, verses 1 through 2. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Right? So they were complaining because the lost were coming to Christ. They were complaining because those who had done wrong were seeking forgiveness. And so Jesus says, look, no, there should be rejoicing, not complaining. When somebody who has been lost, who has been dead to us, comes to us and says, hey, I want to go, I want to know, I want to love you, we should rejoice. Right? But no, the Pharisees and the scribes, the guys who are really supposed to be heading up, bringing in the lost, the religious leaders are mumbling. I remember growing up, I grew up in the church, not this church, I grew up in Rome, but I grew up in a Baptist church, and we were in youth group, and my parents happened to be the youth leaders, and there was a young man. He had really long black hair. He wore all these bits of jewelry. His pants were so loose, and he was grunge itself. He wanted to be the spirit of rock and roll, right? His mother didn't come to church. His parents were separated. His father didn't come to church. And he was one of the town kids, right? And some of the people in the church, they complained, why are we letting him be with our children? He's going to corrupt our kids. I'm going to tell you, the church kids were often worse than he was. He was a loving soul, and nowadays he's a father of his own. He's clean cut, and there should have been rejoicing that he was coming to church, right? Not a grumbling. And so Jesus gives us these parables. So let's read, and we're going to read a lot. We're going to start in verse 11 so that we can focus on this parable of the lost son. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, and then he set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son, making me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robes and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back, safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Okay, so we have this story. And I focus on this one over the other two because this one goes into more depth. This one gives you a bit more of the actual happenings of this, right? And so we have the father and the son says to his father, "Dad, I want my share of the inheritance." Well, here's a fun thing. In cultures past, the inheritance went to the oldest child. The way it worked, right? Even in Judaism, the inheritance went to the oldest son. Everything else was given out of the blessing of the oldest son, right? And so when he says, "Father, give me my share of the inheritance," the father could have said, "You're the second oldest, bud. You got nothing. Have fun. You got nothing." Right? But no, the father says, "I love you. All right, I will give you part of it. I will give you part of my blessing." And so he gives the son stuff. And then the son decides to leave. And you can imagine the conversation that's going on between the father and son. "Son, you don't have to go. Son, I'd like it if you stay here. Son, I can take care of you if you stay with me. I can protect you. I can make sure that things are going well. Son, you don't have to go. But Dad, I want to go. I want to be free." You know, the father could have stopped the son from leaving. He could have said, "Nope, there is no choice. Me, only me. That's it. You're not allowed out of my house." Right? That's my plan for my son, right? Actually, I said 18, you can go. Sarah said, "You can't kick him out at 18. I said, "I'm not kicking him out. I'm just letting him go. He can come back." Right? The reality is that God gives us a choice. God gives us a choice to leave. He gives us a choice to not live under his roof. We'll put that in quotes because it's all his roof, right? He's always given us a choice, right? Even if we go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, he put a tree in the garden and he said, "Don't eat of that tree," right? And in doing that, he gave us a choice, right? If he didn't give us something other than himself, we never would have been able to choose him. And this is one of the things that's different from the parable of the lost sheep. This is different from the parable of the lost coin. You see, the sheep can't choose the shepherd. The coin can't choose the owner. But the son has the choice. Am I going to follow you, or am I going to go out on my own? Am I going to live in my father's house under my father's rules, or am I going to find what life is on my own? And the son, like most of us, said, "You know what? I need to go out there to see the world." It's funny how many people I know grew up saying, "When I get older, I'm just going to leave this place and I'm never coming back." Right? And it's funny how many of those kids have grown up, left, gone to places like New York City or around the world, and they end up back where they started. You know, I have a lot of cousins who said they were going to leave Buffalo, and you know where they all are? In Buffalo, right? I lived in New York City for a little while. Now I'm 45 minutes from my parents, right? Because I came back. It's the way we work. We want to see the world for ourselves. We want to experience it for ourselves. What we wanted to see in reality, humanity wanted to see what life could be like without God. And right now, you can look at our society, our civilization. It is on the verge of collapse, in my opinion, because that is what it is like without God. And He gives us the choice. We have the choice to choose Him or to not choose Him. And really, that is the choice we've always had. That is the choice of sin or not sin. Right? Well, the young man chooses to move out. We see that. He moves out and he spends his money. He spends it all. He wastes it. He flaunts it. Wild living, it says in the NIV. Prodigal living is what they use in the King James, which is where we get the term the prodigal son, right? He's the wild one who sold all his wild oats. And he had fun for a season. It's fun to be out of mom and dad's house for a little bit. But then reality sets in. The Bible tells us that sin is pleasurable for a season. Right? At first, hey, this is great, this is wonderful. Oh, wow, this is so good. But after a while, sin's pleasure dissipates. And we find truly that we are not the one in charge. We are not the one in control. In fact, when we choose sin, we find that we become slaves to sin. We are in bondage to it. And so that's what we see happening here. As he has spent all his money, this famine comes and he binds himself. When it says he hires himself out to one of those people, this is the idea of he is putting himself into servitude. He is binding himself to one of the people outside of his father's household. When we choose not God, we bind ourselves to sin. We become in bondage to sin. Jesus talked a little bit about this, though, in John 8. Right? Jesus said to those Jews who believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed. And you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free." And they answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants, and have never been in bondage to anyone. How can you say you will be made free?" And Jesus answered them, "Most assuredly, I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave to sin. And a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed." Right? And so, when we choose sin, we are like the prodigal son who finds ourselves in bondage. And the reality is that bondage is not pleasant. That bondage is not good. And it's interesting that they talk about him working for this man that he's hired himself out to. I've had many jobs in my life. There's something that every one of my jobs has done for me. Every one of my jobs has given me a paycheck. Right? Everyone has paid me to do the work that I do. And with that work, I go out and I buy food. Essentially, most of my money goes into food. At least it used to. Now, my wife actually has a better handle on things. But you see, we look at this guy and we see him. He's out there, he's feeding the pigs, and he's looking at the slop that the pigs are eating. And have you seen what pigs eat? Have you seen what we feed the pigs? We got a bucket at the house. Every scrap goes into there. Every piece of food that we would not think about eating kind of gets put in there. It is gross. Right? And so he's looking at the food that the pig's eating, and he's thinking, "Oh man, I'm so hungry that this looks good to me." Right? That he was so malnourished. here's the reality. When we are living in sin, we are so spiritually malnourished that even the stuff the world puts out looks good to us. When we allow sin to be our master, when we are living outside of God's rule, anything that looks spiritual looks good to us. Because, hey, it's at least something. It's something. And so we have to remember, not only for our own lives, but also for the lives of those we love who are lost, who are not living a godly life, that they are trying to get some kind of spiritual food in them. And they will take what's offered them. They'll take what they can see, even when it is as putrefying as some pseudo-scientific, psychological babble that really doesn't make sense, but it makes people feel nice for a season. Right? Well, this son, he comes to his senses. And it's when he comes to his senses that he realizes, I did something wrong. I did something wrong and I need to go talk to my father. I'm not worthy of him, but I need to talk with him. Right? And this is one of those things that so many people leave out of the prodigal son. We focus so much on the father's acceptance of the son that we forget that the son had a change of heart too. And here's one of those things that really gets me about this. Is the father, when he sees the son coming from afar off, he runs to his son, right? The father is watching for the son. That's how he sees him coming from afar off. And I want to postulate something to you guys. When the son took off, my bet, and I would bet a lot on this. My bet is that the father paid attention to where the son was going. Right? When my children leave the house, where are you going? Right? When we go places on vacation and stuff, my in-laws, they say, where are you going? We don't even live in the house anymore. Where are you going? Right? My parents do the same thing, so I shouldn't just pick on my in-laws. They're just here to pick on. Right? Where are you going? We want to know where our children are, don't we? Right? The father has servants. He probably sent a guy to follow his son to keep reporting back on his son. He knew what was going on the whole time. And if that doesn't help you out, let's put it this way. The Father is God. You know what? God knows where we are at all times. He knows where we are. He's watching us. And when we choose sin over him, he's still watching us. He knows our situation. At any point in time, the father could have gone in there and said to the son, now you listen to me, you're mine, and that's it. We're going home. The father never did that. The father waited. He watched for the son to come back. And I'm going to tell you that when you are living a life and you are in the place of the Father, and you have somebody in your life who is prodigal, you want to go to them and you want to say, no, you get back in here and you sit down and you're going to stay here. And you know what? The Father didn't do that. He didn't do it to you. He didn't do it to me. He waited for us to come back to him. Right? He waited and he loved them and he was ready to accept them as soon as he came back. Right? But the son had to come back on his own. The son had to make that decision on his own. We can't decide for our loved ones. I have a brother who, on Father's Day, I believe it was, said to my parents, you know what? I don't believe that Jesus is the only way to heaven. I'm going to tell you guys, if you're going to say something to your parents that they aren't going to want to hear, don't do it on a special holiday. Don't tell your father on Father's Day that you believe that the things that he's believed his whole life are wrong, right? Wait till the week after and call him up and say, hey, yeah, Dad, I just wanted to let you know. Right? But my brother, we can't go and say, hey, brother, you've got to believe this. We witness to him, we share, but he has to come to that conclusion on his own. Right? He has to come to that conclusion on his own that he needs the Father. I mean, think about it. If somebody told you had to do it, and that you had no choice, and, I'm a stubborn guy. When people tell me I have to do something, I generally say, no, I don't. Last week we went to a hockey game. It was our first hockey game. Daniel and I, our first hockey game together, too. Like my first, his first, both of our first. And every so often they put up on their big Jumbotron thing, make noise. Well, I'd shut up at that point because they told me to make noise. I'm not going to do what they tell me to do, right? We can't tell the prodigals, you have to do this, or they'll never come to that decision on their own. We offer it to them. We let them know, hey, the Father, he'd love to have you back. But we don't try to force it on them. Right? When we witness to people, we can't force Jesus on them. We can only tell them about him. We can only share that love. And so the Father, he doesn't force the Son to come back. He waits there with open arms. When he sees the Son, he runs to his Son. And we know at this point that the Son is penitent. That he has realized what he has done was wrong. And the Son says it to his Father. Even though his Father's already pulled him in, already hugged him and kissed him, he said, Father, I've sinned against you. Yes, the Father had compassion before the Son said it, but the Son already thought it. The Son was already acting upon it when the Father had compassion on him. This is a fun thing about this parable. We should see ourselves in every point in this parable. We should see ourselves as the Son. We should see ourselves as the Father. We should also see ourselves as that older brother. Have you ever sat there and felt like that? Well, how's that person saved? God, how can you save that person? We were talking when I was younger about some serial killer, Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy, at the end of his life, came to know Christ. Right? And everybody goes, how could Ted Bundy get saved? How could God save that guy? We should be rejoicing. Yeah, he did bad things. He did really bad things. Really gross things. Right? But the reality is that God wants all of his children to come home. That the gospel isn't just for those of us who were generally pretty good. It's not just for those of us who towed the line. No, it's for everyone. In fact, the people who need it the most are those who are lost. So lost that they're like Ted Bundy. Right? They need the gospel. Just like you and I need the gospel. And so we should rejoice when they come in. But oftentimes we are like that older brother and we go, no, not that one. I've had some nemesis in my life. People who and it'd be easy to go, that one was mean to me. My ex-brother-in-law was an abusive man. My prayer, and I told you guys this a couple weeks ago when you guys asked me in person, how do you pray for people like Putin, right? My prayer for my brother-in-law was, Lord, either kill him or save him. The saving would be better, I guess. But my heart wants to kill him. Right? Save him or kill him. Right? Because if you save him, well, then all of a sudden this guy's going to do great things for you, Lord. Because let's face it, we think about the Ted Bundys and go, oh, he's evil. We think about the Putins and go, what he's doing is wrong. We think about my abusive brother and go, hey, he was wrong. Well, let's think about another guy. Let's think about a guy by the name of Saul, right? Saul was a murderer. He murdered Christians. He went into their houses. He dragged them out into the streets. He let people stone them to death, throw rocks at them until they died, right? And Saul got saved. Saul became Paul. Paul took the gospel to the ends of the earth, right? If we want to be like the brother, oh no, God, how could you save a guy like Saul? Right? Because God had purpose for him. And we should rejoice over this. And then you go, but God, it's not fair. It's not fair. I've been with you forever. I've always done what you asked me to do. How can you use a guy like Saul? Right? Well, I've met some guys who got saved later in life who recognized that their lives were horrible, and they look at me and go, you're the lucky one. I go, yeah, well, I didn't live like you lived. I didn't go out and sow my wild oats. I didn't have all that we'll put that in quotes, fun that you had. And they go, no, you had the joy of God with you all that time. Right? You had the blessings of God all that time. You know what the older brother never had to face? He never had to face that hunger where he's looking at the sop in the bucket going, hey, that looks good. I think I might try some of that. Let's put this moldy bread in my mouth and chew it for a little bit just because I'm so hungry. The older brother never had to face that. He never had to worry about what was going on around him because he always had the Father's protection. And that's what the Father says to him, everything I have is yours. So let's rejoice that this one was lost and now he's found. He was dead and he's alive again. So instead of complaining about the lost brothers and sisters, we should be rejoicing for them. Instead of being angry that they are gone, we should be praying for them. We should be watching and looking for their return. And I will tell you that I often pray for my brother and his family. I prayed for the prodigals, and we should all be praying for the prodigals. Because you know what? Once we were prodigal as well. Denzel Washington said about Will Smith this past week, because Will Smith smacked Chris Rock in the face, and Denzel Washington said, "Save for the grace of God, there go I," right? That quote, most of us are familiar with it. The reality is that we've all been in the prodigal's position. And it is only by the grace of God that we are now in the house, working with our Father, doing what He's called us to do. And it's hard. It's hard to see the lost ones, especially when it seems like they're doing so well without God. When it seems like they're succeeding and we're not. It's hard. But the reality is that they're not succeeding without God. They're looking for that slop. They're looking to be fed. And we have the answers. And so let's rejoice when they come to know Christ. When they come in to the Father's house. Will you bow with me in prayer?